Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the organization for inviting me to present this paper. Thank you also to you for choosing this panel. I will hopefully not violate your trust, and I very much promise to be short. What do I do in the paper? I basically analyze some of the policy responses that have been taken in reaction to the Eurozone crisis from a perspective of legitimacy, and I have absolutely no complicated theoretical framework on the basis of this analysis. There are mainly two assumptions. One is that legitimacy is provided through legality, and the second one is that legitimacy is provided through the involvement of parliaments, being national or at European level. And what I focused on is on what I see as the main two paths that have been chosen for taking these policy responses in the absence of treaty reform, treaty amendment. Of course, through treaty amendment, we could have done whatever we want, but as the chair this morning has made very clear, there is a very rigid procedure in the EU for treaty amendment, and so I think two paths have been taken as an alternative. One is a very extensive use of Article 136 of the Treaty on Functioning of the European Union. I'll come back to that. And the other one is what Bruno this morning has called the inter se treaties. So I look at these at these two paths, but I do not do this exhaustively. So in the paper I look at a number of elements, and I will not do it exhaustively. Here I will just, for the sake of argument, choose 4 elements and discuss them very briefly. 2 relating to democratic legitimacy, so input legitimacy, the role of national parliaments, and 2 related more to the legality issue. Also here I make one assumption, and I have not theoretically or empirically tested this, but I think it's not a very controversial assumption, and that is that at this moment where we are in the history of European integration, it is still the national level which provides the most important legitimacy to the European project, and not the European level. And I don't make any assumptions or make any claims on where it should lie or why this is so, but I think that this is very much the case. And if we accept this, I would like to make the argument that that the very different moments, you could say, of providing this legitimacy, and many also, they should not be underestimated and they should not be avoided. And I'll give you 2 examples of where this could be avoided or maybe could not. And the first one is one that I do not go very deeply into in the paper, but is a very topical one, I think, is the direct recapitalization of banks through the ESM treaty. Now, as you know, in June of this year, there has been a deal in the European Council to, in the future, create the possibility to recapitalize banks through the ESM at the moment that we will have a serious banking union. Now, this is not going very fast, so we don't know when this will happen, but very importantly, I'm not quoting, so it's putting it simply, the European Council basically says that this will be done at this possibility of recapitalizing banks through a regular decision. Now, if you look at the ESM treaty, there are a number of instruments, but directly recapitalizing banks is not one of them. There's a possibility to provide loans to member states. There's a possibility to provide loans which can then be used by the member state to recapitalize financial institutions. There is a possibility to for the ESM to buy government bonds on the primary and secondary market. But this option, so direct recapitalization, is at the moment not an instrument. Now, could it be one? That's the question. I cannot speak about the European level, but definitely in the Netherlands, this is very much a debated question, whether the ESM treaty at this moment would allow for the creation of this instrument, or whether there would have to be a treaty amendment. This, I think, is one of the moments where there is a choice for different involvements of national parliaments, and I would argue that the most proper way, but that's on the basis of my personal interpretation of the ESM treaty, it would be most proper to involve directly national parliaments and have what Bruno would probably call an ESM 3 treaty. We know since this morning we have an ESM 1 and 2, and I would argue for an ESM 3. Why? Because the instrument is not there in the treaties at the moment, and I think the instruments that we do have are very much linked to the member states, whereas a direct recapitalization of the banks is different. So this is one choice. The second one is, it relates to the fiscal compact. The fiscal compact is very much criticized for different reasons. It wasn't necessary. It is a violation of the treaties. It's outside the treaties. And some even argue that, also argue that it was not, that basically what has been done in the fiscal compact could have been done already under the treaties. Now, I would like to very shortly provide a different perspective, which is a bit more positive about the fiscal compact. If you accept that the most important element of the fiscal compact, and I believe that it is the balanced budget rule. And not so much the definition of the balanced budget rule, but the fact that there is an obligation under the fiscal compact to incorporate this balanced budget rule in national constitutional law. Preferably in the formal national constitution, but alternatively in a material constitution, so through guarantees of observance, through a permanent and binding character. If you accept that this is the most important innovation, you are basically creating an obligation for member states to amend their constitution. Ideally, and that was the idea at the December European Council, you would have created this obligation through a treaty amendment. In the absence of the possibility, I would argue a fiscal compact, so a treaty, actively involving through ratification in national parliaments and sometimes even through referendum, is preferable over a regulation under Article 136 or enhanced cooperation, exactly because of the active involvement of national parliaments. So from a perspective at least of democratic legitimacy. I move on to a closer look at two other cases, a closer look at legality. Many questions can be raised on both the paths that have been chosen under Article 136 and the interstate treaties. In general, I think with exceptions, the impression by legal scholars is that there are no serious troubles, let's say, from a legality perspective, and I agree on that. However, I think there are two issues which have not received any or much attention, and I would like to focus on these. So again, I will not be exhaustive. I'll just give two examples of where you could say the most creative legal interpretation is being applied. Now, one relates to the use of institutions outside the EU framework, so within these inter-se treaties. And I focus here on the role of the European Court of Justice under the fiscal compact. Generally, scholars see no problem with the role that has been given to the European Court of Justice under the fiscal compact, and I agree on this to a large extent. Relating to the power that has been given using Article 273, which basically gives the European Court of Justice the possibility to decide on matters which are related to EU law but arise in a dispute outside EU law. And this needs a special agreement, and the fiscal compact has been constructed as such a special agreement. So I think that's pretty convincing. There's a good case to be made for that. However, something else has been done, and which has gone, I think, largely unnoticed. There has been created also a possibility for the European Court of Justice to impose sanctions. Now, what happens is member states have the obligation to incorporate in national law this balanced budget rule at a constitutional level. To enforce this, or to create a higher possibility that this will happen, there has been created a possibility for the Commission to make a report on whether member states are actually doing this correctly. And if there's a negative report, member states have the obligation to start under 273 a procedure against the specific member state, which will then lead to a judgment. Now, if this judgment is not implemented, a possibility again is there for a member state to start a second procedure for the imposition of sanctions. Now, the first one is, as I said, explained, is based on Article 273 of the TFEU. But what is the basis of the second possibility to impose sanctions? It is not Article 260, which is a possibility within the treaties to impose sanctions for the European Court of Justice, but within the framework of Article 258 and 259, so the infringement procedure. But that is, very importantly, for an infringement of EU law. Now, the fiscal compact arguably is not EU law. So what I would like to argue here is that since we are dealing with the possibility for the European Court of Justice to impose sanctions for a violation which is not a violation of EU, what you're basically doing is creating a new power for the European Court of Justice. Now, this is maybe a detail, but it is definitely an interesting case of, let's say, creative legal interpretation, and interesting also in light of the principle of attribution, which you all know is part of EU law. My final example is related to the preventive arm of the fiscal compact, so the framework of the multilateral surveillance system of economic policy of member states, Article 121. Now, something very interesting has happened, I think, with regard to this framework on the basis of Article 136 TFEU. Article 136 TFEU has been used recently for a number of things. One of the things was discussed in the previous presentation, namely the introduction of reverse qualified majority voting in sanctioning, that is, new sanctions created both in the preventive and the corrective arm of the Stability and Growth Pact. Another thing which has been done on the basis of Article 136 is, I think very interestingly, the incorporation of instructions that have been given to Greece into EU law through a combination of 126.9 and 136. I will not discuss these. I will discuss a third element, and that is the creation of new sanctions itself, using a combination of 121.6 and 136, only for Eurozone member states. And these sanctions relate to one of the procedures that was mentioned already this morning, the sanctions in the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. And another one, this procedure was created by the six-pack. And another one is related to sanctions which have been created in what you could call the MTO procedure, which already existed, but which has been reinforced, medium-term objective procedure under Stability and Growth Pact. Now, what happened here? The interesting thing is that if you look at Article 121 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, so the multilateral surveillance system of economic policy, this is a recommendation-based system. And we know that recommendations are not legally binding. Article 288 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Now, what happened here is that at the end of these procedures, which have been created in the framework of Article 121, there's a possibility to impose sanctions. And a possibility to impose sanctions for non-compliance of recommendations. So this changes the character of the recommendations. If they're not legally binding, they should not lead to a sanction if you do not follow them up. And this also, I think, changes the character of the multilateral surveillance system framework. So my second example of what you could call creative legal interpretation. This is it. I promised to be short, and I also said I would not be exhaustive, so I hopefully done both.